Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider being a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amounts in the link given in the description box. But the least you can do is like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Wolff is an economist, author, and commentator on current events. Professor Wolff, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here.
I want to kickstart with DOGE, the stated objective of firing. We don't have the exact data, but the February data said that more than 62,000 federal employees were fired. I suspect the numbers would be far higher. The justification is to save on wasteful expenditure for the government. Of course, the numbers don't add up well because Bloomberg's Financial Times, who are not ideologically opposed to firing people, have said that the number of $105 billion that Elon Musk and his co said has saved due to those efforts, the actual number might be 10% of that, which is like 10 billion. And given they want to save about $1 trillion, if the fiscal deficit is to come down for 6 to 7% to 3%, as Scott Bessent has said, 10 billion is just nothing. If that's the case, what do you think is the real objective of DOGE?
Well, there are several. There are several objectives and there are several motivations that govern all of this. It has been a desire of the entire employer class in the United States, with a few exceptions, of course, but the bulk view has always been ideologically, for at least a century, that the most important thing for them is to get the government to tax them less and to regulate them less. This has been a staple of the Republican Party, and a good part of the Democratic Party has looked the other way and allowed that to go on. So nothing is new about any of this, because if you don't want regulation and if you don't want to pay the taxes, then the obvious thing to do is to question the employees, the people who work at the federal government, who are paid a salary out of the taxes and whose work is largely to regulate what's going on. It's important to remember a simple statistic. According to the United States Senate Census, 3% of our people are employers. The other 97% are not. The 3% are the ones who don't want taxes, who don't want regulation, and who therefore are eager to cut the federal jobs, to cut whatever it is taxes pay for, and to get the government to leave them alone. So the first thing to understand is that Doge, Musk, Trump, there is absolutely nothing new, nothing original at all. If there is something a little bit different, it is the not so surprising fact that having won a majority, a small one, but a majority in both the Senate and the House, the president can do things he otherwise wouldn't be able to do quite so quickly and quite so dramatically. And Mr. Trump is expert at public relations, we call that here in the United States. And so he makes a very big show every day. Another press conference, another remark, dramatic, exaggerated, often untrue, but attention getting, something dramatic that he can get headlines for. But other than that, no, there is nothing new. Claiming that the government can be made more efficient is a claim that is made at least 10 times a day, every year in the United States. No one except the media who want to please Mr. Trump take that stuff seriously. And now, just to hammer it home, a statistic to keep in mind. Back in the 1960s, I've done this work, so I'm speaking to you of my own statistical work. Back in the 1960s, the total number of uh, employees of the federal government, that is what Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk are firing people from, was around 2.5 million civilian employees and about another 2.5 million in the military. Okay? Today, 2025, what is the number of civilian employees before Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk started firing them? You might be surprised to learn that the number of civilian federal employees is 2.5 million people. It hasn't changed. The population of this country has grown by 150 million people, but we have in fact not grown the federal workforce. You know what that's usually called? Efficient. It means that the federal labor force hasn't mushroomed, hasn't grown out of proportion with the people it serves, etc., etc. If ever there was no basis for a witch hunt of hatchetling federal employees, it's now. Let me show you another way of understanding it. We have three levels of government in the United States: federal, state, and local. Federal civilian employees, 2.5 million. State employees, 5 million. Local employees, 15 million. If you were really interested in the efficiency of public employees, you'd go after the local and the state, because that's 20 million workers, not the federal government, which is 2.5 million workers. It is ridiculous. And the minute you know, you see through. This is a public relations operation. That's all. Doing what conservative business people want. That's really crucial. All right. Now, the second more important issue. And this is so important, particularly for people in India and China and elsewhere to understand. The United States capitalism is a seriously troubled institution. The American empire is declining, and that hurts the domestic capitalism, which in turn weakens the empire. This is a very bad situation. Over recent years, the government, to cope with this, has run enormous budgetary deficits, exceeding $1 trillion a year. So that now, for example, our accumulated national debt is much larger than our annual GDP, and that did not used to be the case. What this means is that to keep the economy going, taxes on corporations and the rich have been lowered or kept down. Taxes on the mass of people have been rose up until the mass of people said no more. We've had a tax revolt in this country for 30 years. The solution was crazy, economically crazy, to borrow. Suddenly, in peacetime, the government borrowed wild amounts of money. In the past, we only borrowed to pay for war, because in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, in Iraq, if you had taxed the American people to pay for the war would never have happened. It would have been very short if it happened. So you borrowed to avoid taxing. But in recent years, even without war, borrowing so that the government could continue to stimulate the capitalism because it's weak without taxing corporations and the rich who forbid it.
This was mostly after the global financial crisis you were talking about.
Particularly, that's right. And now we have the ultimate crisis. The creditors who have been lending the money are getting nervous about the United States. They're getting nervous that this country may be tempted by internal difficulty to be unable to pay the interest and to repay the debt, and so they're leery of lending more. They have let the United States government know something must be done. And what Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance represent is an effort of the business community to make an experiment. Can they get away with smashing down the public services? You know this because it happens in many countries. It used to be something we observed from the United States, but now the crisis has come here and we're right in the middle of it. And we have a dramatic effort, Mr. Trump, to do this in the hopes that maybe somehow he can rearrange things so we aren't so weak and we don't have to borrow so much, and etc., etc. It is very unclear whether he can do this, whether he will succeed. Meanwhile, the resistance and the hostility to him gets stronger inside the United States every day.
Yeah, the numbers don't suggest that he will be able to do this, given a congressional budgetary office estimates say that in the next decade between 2025 and 2034, the social security component would be roughly about 20 trillion, and net interest would be about 14 trillion. Medicare would be like 13 trillion, and defense would be 10 trillion. And these are the massive components. A lot has been talked about foreign aid. Foreign would be like 0.5 trillion. Right. So it's just peanuts. It's just nothing. And with the indications in the Middle East now, we don't expect the defense to come down. And there has been already some revolt against cutting down on Medicare and social securities. You mentioned about the local and the state level, and the swing states are very, very nervous, given a lot of people from the Republican camp were the ones who had fallen behind in the economic ladder and were reliant on social securities. We have concrete data on that. So the calculus doesn't seem to be correct. Of course, the easiest way, it seems to me, is taxing the top layer if you were to actually control the debt and deficit, given there is a justification to do that because the US has been able to do that riding on the dollar's unique position. Uh, yeah, that's what it seems to me. Your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, there is the hope in the government's economic advisors that somehow, and they're the ones who use the word somehow over and over. So it's not just me. That somehow the tariffs and the newly found colonialist surge, taking Panama, taking Greenland, taking Canada, I mean, all kinds of appearance wild ideas are in fact their way of saying there are some ways, despite the numbers you point to pull this off. And I'll give you an example. There are calculations about tariffs. Now, if you know anything about tariffs, since again, there is nothing new about a tariff. Tariffs have been used for hundreds of years in the world economy. There's an immense literature in economics about tariffs. We know many experiments where we have studied what did the tariff do, who did it hurt, how much, and so all of that is ignored by Mr. Trump, who tells you he will do a tariff and it will have this effect, which you cannot do. I mean, it may have that effect, but there is absolutely no guarantee, no clarity, no way to know such a thing. But again, he's a good showman, so he tells the story, and most of the journalists that follow him don't know that literature and are not in a position usually to say. So let me say, if you had the kinds of responses to the tariffs that Mr. Trump and his advisors imagine and say publicly, they might be able to do it. But there's very clear reason to believe that they won't be able to do that. I'll give you only two examples. One, there is the so-called issue of retaliation. If you put a tariff on a product or a country or a region, then the producer of that product in that region will go to his or her government and demand a retaliatory in order to improve their situation and as a bargaining chip to maybe reduce the tariff or end it, or all of that's, the literature is full of all of that. There is no reason to assume that there won't be retaliation. And here comes reason number two. Reason number two is there's every reason to assume enormous retaliation for a simple but very important reason. The United States now has, for the first time in a century, a major, serious economic competitor. We have not had that. Very important to understand. Coming out of World War II, the United States was the absolute dominant capitalist power. It is as important to shaping the world economy as, for example, Mahatma Gandhi and the independence of India from the British Empire, which happened immediately after the war as well. These are absolutely historic transformations. People seem to lose sight of it. They take it for granted. Every other country, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, China, you name it, were destroyed in World War II. In very large part, terrible warfare. I mean, in China, it had started even earlier with the invasion in the north in 1931, if you know the history. So you have a long, horrible war, first with the Japanese, then later the Civil War, et cetera, et cetera. So the United States has absolute dominance, is able to do all kinds of things. And the result is for almost a century, the mentality here. I'm in America. I was born and raised and worked here all my life. The mentality is you can do anything. You are the world power. Yes, there was the Soviet Union, and they had some military power and they had some political, but economically they were irrelevant. Never were. They are today, and they were then. They're not a relevant constraint on the United States economically. But China is in every way, and more so with each passing week. I mean, if you pick up the headlines today, you will learn that BYD Corporation, in the electric vehicle maker in China, just passed Tesla. It sold more cars than Tesla. It earned a bigger revenue in the world than Tesla. It already has the best electric vehicles in the world at the cheapest price. And last week it announced a new battery that can be charged in 5 minutes. I mean, there's no end. I could give you many other examples, but there are plenty. So the United States doesn't have the freedom. when they hit China with tariffs, China retaliated to make life particularly difficult for American farmers. Now, farmers are a very important part of the Republican Party coalition. You make those angry, you weaken that. That's what's going on, and people are going to see the changes coming because the United States is squeezed and has got very little left. It doesn't have the economic power it once had, not even close. It has real competitors. I mean, just to remind everyone, the population of the countries that are now members of the BRICS is between 50 and 60% of the world people. The United States has got 4.5%. That's an immense problem. And it's not overcome by the GDP of the United States. Not anymore. It's over. And the splitting between the United States and Europe over Ukraine is a symptom. The notion that tariffs will be a magical way to get out of this difficulty, that's a symptom of how difficult it is. Having a character like Mr. Trump as president, that's also a symptom. What people need to understand is that the world economy is changing. The American empire is declining with no end in sight.
One of the talks about the tariffs is also bringing back industrial jobs to the United States. I mean, this idea is again not new. I remember, reading about the Clinton administration before he unraveled it completely. As soon as he came, he spoke about bringing back industries. Soon after he gave up all of that and constituted the free trade regime that Trump is now attacking. And he's also talking along those lines, ironically, that we would bring back industries. And I want to hear your thoughts, given I think it's an open-ended debate about the share of industry for advanced capitalist countries, given in Germany, the talk is different, that we are over leveraging our export industries, we are underdeveloping and deleveraging our capital markets, venture capital, and that is keeping our high tech services down. In the US, the talks are exactly the opposite, that we have over leveraged the services and so on. What do you, I don't want to ask you a number, but it's the 10% share of industry now in the United States. What do you think should be the share of industry in the United States? I know it entails a whole lot of things given the attack on immigration, and these are full of contradictions. On one hand, you want to retain your dollar hegemony and capital market hegemony. On the other hand, you also like to industrialize. You are talking about this new Plaza Accord of devaluating dollar, but also would like to continue to suck capital. So full of contradictions, but what's your thoughts on this?
Well, let me try to answer it this way. There is a broad consensus in the United States among people from very different perspectives that the level of deindustrialization that the United States undertook uh, over the last 40, 50 years is excessive, that we should not have done that as a nation. It is not healthy economically. It is particularly dangerous militarily. And so, whether you're right wing or left wing, for jobs and all the rest of it, there is a notion we should reshore, as it's called, our industries. Let me amend your insight. You were right, but let me make it even stronger. I've done the work. Every one of the last 11 presidents has promised to bring back manufacturing, and not a single one ever delivered on that promise. So that promise that shows you that this is a largely uncontroversial claim. It's a good, clever thing for a politician to make because no one is really going to say anything against it. It's like being in favor of ice cream or lovely children or good weather. I mean, it's what politicians do because they have nothing they dare say. Uh, so there's a consensus. And so everybody is quote unquote in favor of it. And anything and everything any politician has to do for other reasons, if you can suggest that it will be useful to bring manufacturing back, you say that too. It doesn't really, and by now, no one listens because it's empty verbiage. It has no, so not the first thing. Now, second thing, yes, the whole logic of a tariff always was to protect your own domestic industry because you're making it more difficult for foreigners to sell in your market because they have to pay a tax. You don't have to. It is a, by the way, if people who, I'm an economist, so you'll forgive me, people have been listening to economists explain why tariffs are irrational, why the government intervening in the economy is irrational, why the free market with minimum intervention is the path to prosperity and growth. And what we have with a tariff is a massive government intervention in the economy, discriminating literally from one producer to another, massively, affecting prices, values, costs, production systems, supply chains, everything. This makes a joke out of 100 years of debate in which the West, like the United States or Britain, was in favor of laissez faire. No laissez faire anymore. All get in there and intervene. That's that's not just a mockery of 100 years of economic debate that were irrelevant. They were. It's more than that. It shows you how desperate they are. People don't revert and abandon their psychology of 100 years or 200 years or 300 years overnight. You have to be under great stress to do this. What you're watching, the nationalist economics, interventionist economics, government control economics. That's another sign of how serious the changes we're living through actually are. Okay, now on the tariffs per se. How in the world do you imagine this is going to happen? I'll give you a concrete example. Many enterprises around the world set up factories in Mexico over the last 40 years. Why? Labor is cheap and it's very close to the American market, so you can produce cheaply. The Mexicans were eager to give work to their people, so they made the arrival easy, and you then export it into the United States, and under NAFTA, no tariff, no duty to pay. Same thing for Canada, but I want to focus on Mexico. If you put a tariff on Mexico, which Trump says he's going to do, I believe next week, those are supposed to begin. Okay.
Would you celebrate the Liberation Day?
Yeah, it's right, the Liberation Day. Yeah, that kind of advertising lingo, that's another sign that they're desperate. They really are. But let me stay with the point. It is expensive to move a factory. It costs years and billions to put those factories into Mexico. It is a process of years and billions to move them. Okay? You don't want to do that for a tariff unless, of course, you can be sure the tariff will be in force for at least 5 or 10 years. But Mr. Trump has already shown you you can't be sure his tariff is in force for 25 minutes, let alone 10 years. This is ridiculous. They're not going to do it. It would be insane to do that. Likewise, to move from Mexico, hoping that what he did to Mexico will not be done to Guatemala. So you move to Guatemala because it's next door to Mexico. But of course, that's stupid because Mr. Trump may do that to Guatemala tomorrow. So you can't. Not only that, in Mexico now, wages are going to be going down, which is an incentive to stay there. Why are they going down? Because you're deporting millions of Mexicans out of the United States back into Mexico where there aren't enough jobs and they're going to compete. And none of this is taken into account. And if you did come to the United States, which they won't, you would have to make it worthwhile given the risks of moving. You'd have to make it really worthwhile. And there's only one way to do that in this country, and that is to bring the wages way down. To begin to make the United States a wage competitor with Mexico. And can that be done? I'm afraid the answer is yes, it can. But it will produce unimaginable social contradictions here, violence, difficulty. This is a country that has more guns per person than any place on earth. And those guns, they know how to use them, and you're not going to do what you're doing to them. Or you're going to have a country with a level of violence that you will be reading about in newspapers in your part of the world and shaking your head in disbelief.
I think one thing that we you have already mentioned, but we need to rehash here is the tax policy, because what distinguishes Trump administration's economic policies from the nationalist post-war policies, which the similarities you have outlined, but the distinction is the tax policies, because the 2017 tax and was it Jobs Act or something? It's so ironical, and he has been saying many jobs were back, and now more jobs are getting back. But anyway, that Tax and Job Act of 2017 that gave massive tax cuts to corporations is soon expiring, and he has promised that he would not just extend it or might even deepen it. So talk about that. What do you expect? Would there be further tax cuts?
Well, let's review. You are absolutely right. The most generous tax cut to corporations and the rich, maybe ever, but certainly in a long time, were passed in December of 2017 at a time when Mr. Trump was president. It was not only his first major economic achievement, it was his only major economic achievement. That is what everyone remembers of his first 4-year term. That was what he did. He delivered to the donors a gift that they treasured, which is why they supported him for a second term. It is his single most important achievement, no question. And it is important to understand it because as the United States declines and as more and more of the world will be forced to think about it, to understand it, to develop policies to cope in each corner of the world with the consequences, because we are, after all, a very rich country still. They're going to have to understand what this is about. And what this is about is that from 1980 to 2017, roughly 40 years, had been a situation of a radical redistribution of wealth and income in the United States from the bottom and the middle to the top. Even in our politics, which is so devoted to topics that don't matter and to deflecting and diverting people's attention, it was understood by both Republicans and Democratic politicians that you could get some attention by referring to the tragedy of the disappearing American middle class. And that was true enough. You could see it everywhere. The stores that used to sell goods to middle America were disappearing. The whole situation, you either were rich or you were poor. But the middle disappeared. The people at the top were doing better than they had ever done. The stock market went crazy in the 80s and 90s. That's why we had the dot-com crisis in the early years of this millennium, because it was an out of control field day for the rich. Here's my point. Never did a society need a tax cut for corporations and the rich less than the United States in 2017. And so out of control is capitalism here that when it didn't need to, it gave even more of a tax cut to corporations and the rich. That's not a sign of wisdom. That's a sign of deep, self destructive greed and stupidity. And by the way, there are elements of our ruling class who understand what I just said. It's not just the critics like me. If you listen to Warren Buffett, one of our bigger billionaires, he will tell you a very parallel kind of story. And again, there are others too. So the bill that was passed in Congress in December of 2017 had an opposition from liberal Democrats, Bernie Sanders, the usual. And so the compromise that was reached, which is often the case, was to do something called sunset. It's using the word sunset as a verb. You sunset the law so that it expires, and the year it was put to expire is this one, 2025. So Mr. Trump has a serious problem. He has to keep that going. He has to pass a law preserving those tax cuts. Because if he doesn't, all of his donors are going to get an enormous tax increase because the law as of 2017 will go back into effect and they'll have to pay more. That will make them very unhappy with Mr. Trump. If he has a task, number one, that's it. Those of you abroad, don't be fooled by all the other shenanigans. That is his key. He has to get that done. If he takes Greenland to do it, fine. If he snatches the Panama Canal, they don't care. They really don't. That's the issue. Okay, that gives him a problem because he wants to be, like all Republicans, he wants to be even more generous, as you rightly ask. Does he want to give even more? Yes. He has already said he would like to do this, that, because this is how you cultivate. You give this industry or that company a tax cut, and you get a nice donation, not just for you as president, but for all. Now, on one hand, he doesn't need it so much because he has a personal banker in Elon Musk, but no one knows how long this will last. We don't even know how long Mr. Musk will be in a position to do what he does. But in any case, Mr. Trump has to deliver on these tax cuts. So one of the ways you can see cutting federal employees is literally simply budgeting. He's lowering the budget item for federal employees so he can move that money over and use it to sustain the tax cuts. So in other words, you won't have to borrow to pay all those workers. He's therefore, he has the short-term mentality that all American politicians do. He has to get through this cycle. Otherwise, there's no point in discussing the long run because he won't be relevant to it because he won't be in the position. So he's got to deliver now. So, but if you fire, I don't know, 500,000 federal employees, and you cause chaos in the country, which is happening, by the way. We have now literally every day newspapers that are not friendly to Mr. Trump, and we still have a bunch of those. They carry stories. Here is Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Jones. She is 69 years old, and she didn't get her check from Social Security, and she called the number and nobody answered. They put her on hold. She waited 11 hours and got sick because she had to have somebody fix whatever was going wrong. Why didn't she get it? You know what you are doing? You are, as we call it, shooting yourself in the foot here. He doesn't care because he has to deliver the tax cut and he can't borrow the way he used to. I mean, in the end, he probably will. And we're not yet at the point where the world will say, we won't lend to you. But
Yeah.
look, China has reduced its holdings of US debt from one point, these are the official statistics, from 1.1 trillion 3 or 4 years ago to about 750, 800 billion now. Now, those are big numbers, but that's a big decline. And it's not just because of the hostilities, that's part of it, but it's also because, uh-oh. And at this point, the only one holding on is Japan, and that's a very special story of a different, that's a different conversation.
Yeah, also not just these sovereign central banks, but also the private players here, the PIMCO in the US, PIMCO, the BlackRocks, they're already shifting, looking for markets in Europe, in Australia, and now that the zero interest rate regime in Japan is over, they're looking for Japan as a potential, lending market, and that is
Let,
make.
let me interrupt and just add, it's a very important insight. London, to this day, is an important economic thing. Long after the British Empire is gone, long after manufacturing in Britain is a memory, you held on to the capital that you could lend out and become the parasite, the global snatcher of capital gains, interest, dividend. And look, the United States replaced Britain, the American empire. And as the empire goes down, that's right, New York becomes the center for BlackRock and Blackstone and all of the others, shifting the assets to the rest of the world, which makes perfect sense. The BYD Corporation, which has defeated Tesla, is funded in a significant way by Warren Buffett. I mean, come on, it's obvious, but I want to stress to you and to your audience here in the United States, where I make these comments that I'm making with you all the time, and I'm on the radio and television here in this country a lot, there is a level of denial that is stunning. I wish I had been part of the British Empire. I keep asking myself, did they handle it that way too? Our leading politicians deny every day what I'm telling you. We just had a presidential election, Trump versus Kamala Harris. Neither one of them spoke about a declining capitalism. Neither one of them mentioned a declining empire. You know, the BRICS never came up. You know, what? It is an amazing, not surprising, but an amazing phenomena in which something so important needs to be completely erased, as if you had a small child, 2 years old, going for a walk with the mother or the father and encountering a dog who barks and it's a little scary. And the little child puts the hands in front of the eyes because if she can't see the doggy, it's not there. And we know when she gets to be a couple of years older, she will learn the dog is still there even when you can't see it. Americans are not, they're 2 years old. They're not 4 years old yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to add finally that the even the stock market was not doing well. I mean, they're talking about the corrections. Now in the last 2 days, today and yesterday, they are saying that there is a tanking out of that correction, and they're saying that the the tech companies are now coming back. They are the Nvidia and Tesla, their shares are up now, but the stock market, the fact of the matter remains that the stock market is doing extremely poorly, and that might be another incentive for Trump to give another massive tax cut, because a lot of those tax cut goes into fueling the stock market.
And he wants now to get rid of Mr. Powell at the Federal Reserve so they can push the interest rates down. And they may give up on their business and deficit spend some more because they have to juice this economy. Yeah, they keep doing it, but each time they lose a certain part of the population that begins to understand. Look, I just this morning in the work that I'm doing, the level of credit card debt that is in
exactly.
arrears, it's about 15% or 12 or 15%, as high as it's been for quite a while. These are all the signs. You're not solving the problem. The level of inflation hasn't come down. It's 3 or 4%. Is a damn good chance with the tariffs it'll go up. On and on and on. You know, we are watching a declining empire. If there's a single thought I can leave you with on this conversation, that is the reality that is shaping what Mr. Trump can do, what he can say, how he has to backtrack, what will be achieved in Ukraine or not, or what will happen in the Middle East. We are still a very big fish in the global pond. And as that fish thrashes around trying to figure out how to end its decline, you're going to see much of world trade changing. Mr. Trump is determined to use, he can't run again. This is it. He's finished with this. Yeah, he can
No,
try, but I doubt it. It'll look too much like what it is. But maybe I've been surprised before. But look at it that way. The best metaphor I know, you are watching desperation. Try this, try that, go there. When it seems to you crazy, it is. But it's the craziness of people that are in a desperate situation. It's not some weird having to do with this particular personality. We don't have this problem because there's Trump. We have Trump because we have these problems.
we'll leave it there, Professor Wolf. Thank you so much for your time, and
My pleasure. Your questions are great, and these are important conversations. If you want to continue them, just let me know.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.